Something I learned at Canisius High School. I learned something about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's a lot of words. But what it talked about was there are certain things that humans need. There are certain things that are a little more important than others, and one of those very, very important was shelter. And in our city, oftentimes we find a lot of times we're arguing and fighting about shelter, how it should be done. So I'm glad to be joined here today by people that are taking to the front lines, taking to the forefront, and trying to make housing something very equitable that everybody can have a chance to have a roof over their heads. I'm joined by a Mr. Daniel Corbitt and a Stephen Haagsman. Haagsman. Well, I think I was going to say Mr. Stephen H. today at the show. So before we get into some of the things that we want to talk about, I just want to give you guys a chance to say, what are you doing? And more specifically, why is housing important to you? I know, like I said, it's in the hierarchy of needs, but I think you guys as professionals may have a different perspective. Why is housing so important to you?
Well, Austin, let me just start off by saying thank you so much for having us, really giving us an opportunity to speak to these critically important issues. Like you mentioned, housing is a fundamental human right, and where you live matters. It determines what opportunities you have available to you. And like you said, we're trying to make housing more equitable. We want to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to live in the housing and communities of their choice. And frankly, this is not happening today. For too long and for too often, folks have been denied those basic opportunities. And when you're denied an opportunity to live in safe, quality, affordable housing, that has ripple consequences that has really detrimental effects on our community that we see every single day.
Right.
And yeah, I just want to echo everything that Dan said, but also, in New York State, tenants have a decent number of rights, more so than in a lot of other states. That's not to say that there aren't things that can be improved. There definitely can be, but rights don't really matter if they only exist on paper. And people need to know their rights if they're going to stand up for them, if those rights aren't being respected. And then there also needs to be somebody who can work with those people whose rights are being violated and help them through those situations. And so that's what we're here for. And we really want to make sure that people are able to exercise their rights. And, housing a difficult thing to obtain in the best of circumstances, especially the way the economy is and the housing market is right now. And most often things are not the best of circumstances. So we're trying to help people be as secure as they can in their housing, working within the system, but also pushing for improvements to that system.
Absolutely. And two things that you talked about were rights, the infringement of those rights, and also about the economy. And I want to jump right into the things because I think this is very important information for everybody, because a lot of things that we're going to be talking about today are discrimination, things that we need to look out for. And like you said, the danger happens when you don't know your rights and you can't fight to protect them because you don't know quite what you're fighting for. So let's hop straight in, right? I'm applying for my house. Right, I'm writing down my source of income. I'm writing down my current living situations. I know you have listed here source of income and disability. What are ways that people are getting discriminated against, and why is that so dangerous? And we'll go into how we fix it. But let's start with what is source of income and disability discrimination, and what should we be looking out for in our housing?
Yeah, well, I would say, starting off with source of income discrimination, it's one of the most pervasive types of discrimination that we see. Again, folks are being denied these fundamental opportunities, not because they can't afford to live where they want, but because there's stigma associated with how they want to pay the rent. So maybe they're paying with government assistance, maybe they have child support, maybe it's just non-wage income, Social Security, disability benefits. So folks are being denied the use of those lawful sources of income, and they're not being given those fundamental opportunities. So we see this quite a bit, and it a lot of times has to do when folks have housing assistance. And again, we need to ensure that when folks obtain this housing assistance, which, our government is saying, look, we're going to give folks this means to afford safe, quality housing. We need to make sure that they're not facing barriers that are keeping them from being able to access that housing. But as I mentioned, it is one of the most common types of discrimination that we see. It's been actually the law throughout New York State since 2019 that folks cannot be discriminated against based on their lawful source of income. But unfortunately, it is still occurring on a daily basis. And even if you go on Craigslist, some of these other places, Facebook Marketplace, you'll see a lot of these ads saying, we don't take government assistance, we don't want Section 8, et cetera, et cetera. That is discrimination, and that's against the law. And there are consequences. And just like Stephen said, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization. We try to help folks who have faced discrimination, but really our goal is to try to empower the community so folks can advocate for themselves, because that's the best type of advocacy you can have, when someone is able to assert their rights, to know their rights, and to be able to overcome these barriers, these injustices that are perpetrated every single day.
And with disability discrimination, so discrimination can happen to somebody when they're searching for housing, but it can also happen where they're already living. And disability discrimination is something where we often, we see a little bit of both, but a lot more people being discriminated against after they have already moved in somewhere and secured housing. It makes it more difficult to keep it. So people with disabilities, they have a lot of rights. They can request reasonable accommodations, which is changing a rule or a policy that a housing provider might have in a way that allows them to have full use of the place where they're living. So something like living with a service animal or a support animal, even if there's a no pets policy, or having a designated parking space near the entrance to the building if they have a mobility impairment. And those are things that people with disabilities are entitled to ask for. But people are denied those requests all the time. And the consequence of that is that either people aren't able to have full use of the place where they're living, or they're having to go find a new place to live. And that instability is a huge problem. And so housing discrimination often happens in the process of being denied for housing that someone might be qualified for, but it can also happen by being denied rights that someone should have in the place where they already live.
Absolutely, and I want to ask you a question. So what do we do, right? We see discrimination. We're fighting with this disability discrimination while we live in a place, and it's crazy that you say that, because it almost sounds like a oxymoron. We're giving people rights and then we're punishing them for using them. So it's very difficult. But let's say I'm someone who's finding myself in a situation, or I'm just applying and I'm seeing all these, like you said, no Section 8, no government assistance. What do I do? You said this consequence, and we want advocacy in the people. We want to give people the power, teach them how to fish. What should we do? What are we looking at? What resource do we need to look at to say we can combat this and make a change? And if there are things that we can do, can we still get this housing after we make that report?
It's an excellent question. And, for so many folks, and again, like I said, discrimination is happening on a daily basis, but so many folks go through, obviously, their day. They're not expecting to be confronted with this. So they're not prepared when it happens. So, and frankly, a lot of times discrimination is so subtle, folks don't even realize it happened. Or again, they're not aware of their rights, and they might not be aware that that is illegal, what just happened. So, the first step, like I said, educating yourself, knowing what the law says, knowing what is illegal, what these housing providers can and cannot ask you. As I mentioned, source of income discrimination, also disability discrimination. We also see a lot of familial status discrimination. Folks who have children under the age of 18 in their household are being denied housing because, again, there's a lot of stigma around young children in the household. A lot of landlords don't want to rent to someone with young children. That's against the law. But again, it's happening every single day. So first step, educate yourself, know what the law says. And then when it happens, make sure that you document it. Okay, if some landlord says, no, I'm not going to rent you because of where you get your income from, or because you have young children in your household, make sure that you document that. And also, if it is subtle, if you just have a lot of times folks just have this feeling that something wasn't right here. Something went down here. I maybe don't know necessarily that, yes, this was discriminatory, but something wasn't right. I was getting one story, then they found out that I have kids, and then the story changed. Suddenly the apartment wasn't available. Then, contact us. And what we can do is we can launch an investigation. And we have trained individuals that go out there just like a regular home seeker. They'll try to rent the apartment, they'll try to buy the house, and they will observe the business practices of that housing provider. And if they gather evidence of discrimination, we can use that to assist that individual to seek justice in that matter, whatever that might mean for that individual who's been the victim of discrimination. So, the first step, educate yourself, then, be aware that if it happens, make sure you're documenting whatever you can. And then the next step, reach out to us, other organizations that might be able to help in this situation as well. We work with, for instance, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, New York State Division of Human Rights. These are the government agencies that actually enforce these laws. So when we find evidence of discrimination, we can file the case. We can help that individual file that case to that government agency, and they can actually enforce those laws as well.
Yeah, I always emphasize to people that if they have some sort of evidence that they've experienced discrimination, like a text message from a landlord saying, we don't take Section 8, that's great. That helps. It makes our job easier. But it's not necessary to report discrimination. If you think, like Dan said, if you just have this bad feeling, it seems like the landlord changed their tune as soon as they found out that you've got kids or that you have a Section 8 voucher, don't let a lack of hard evidence stop you from reporting that, because like Dan said, we can investigate and see if this is a practice this housing provider is engaging in on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Outside of the radio, I speak. And one of the big things I always talk about are win-wins, right? We want to make sure that everybody has a win-win. And when you're talking about facilitating and making change is hard on people, right? And oftentimes when people have pushback, that's when change gets even harder. So to play devil's advocate, because we have a little bit of time, I don't want to necessarily go to the other side, but I want to ask you guys, if I'm a landlord listening, I might be a little nervous, right? I might be sweating a little bit. So I want you guys to give me a picture, if you can. What does an equitable housing system look like? What metrics can landlords choose by, and what metrics can't they? And where are we trying to get to? Where is the goal? Like we talk about, it's not just disability source of income. There's familial. I bet there's also age discrimination. There's probably a plethora and a spectrum of discrimination. But what would an ideal housing system look like? Is it based on what is the merits that we choose people to live in houses by, or is it truly first come, first serve? I don't know. So can you guys paint a better picture for someone who's trying to look in?
Well, to me, it's really making housing decisions that are completely devoid from any protected class information. Just like you said, that whole spectrum of characteristics that under the law are referred to as protected class. So someone's race, their color, their national origin, their religion, their sex, their familial status, their source of income, their age, their military status, all of these characteristics really shouldn't come into the equation at all. If I'm a housing provider and I'm looking to see, okay, who am I going to rent to? Who am I going to sell to? Who am I going to give a loan to if in the case of the lending industry, because they have these laws applied to them as well. None of those characteristics should come into play because they do not denote whether or not that person is going to be a good tenant, a good owner, a good borrower. Okay, so what should I be looking at as a housing provider? Is that person going to take care of the property? Are they going to pay the rent on time? Are they going to not bother the neighbors? So those types of questions are all legitimate. But anything that you start getting into that protected class information, that's completely illegitimate and it's illegal, and they should not be asking about that information.
And housing providers should be trying to use objective criteria when they're deciding who to rent to, because everybody has their own biases, and we're not always aware of the biases that we have. And so anyone, regardless of who they are, where they came from, what their background is, they're going to have these biases. Whether they're aware of them or not. And if you start making subjective decisions, you might accidentally be engaging in some sort of discriminatory conduct, even if that's not your intent. And so keeping things objective and, landlords, housing providers, they can confirm that someone has sufficient income to pay the rent. It's just that they have to consider all of someone's lawful sources of income equally. They can't say you can only pay for rent with money you make from a job. They have to consider all the other sources as well. They can do credit checks. They can ask for references of prior landlords. And so these are things that landlords and housing providers can ask about and make decisions based on. And then I think once a landlord has decided to rent to someone, then it's really important for both parties, both the tenant and the landlord, to realize that the other person is a human being. I think a lot of times people can get away from that. Tenants can look at landlords as, like some shadowy figure in the clouds, and that's not true. They're people. Even if they've created an LLC to own the property under, there's still a person behind it. And the same with tenants. So landlords need to realize that tenants are humans, and just because they do one thing that annoys you, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. People do things that they regret, and people do things that aren't smart all the time. It doesn't make them a bad person. And so just both tenants and landlords remembering that the other person is a human and trying to work through problems that may arise and not just jump to the worst conclusion immediately. I think landlords, often really good landlords, they're willing to work with tenants. If a tenant can't pay the rent on the day it's due, they can come together and say, look, my paycheck's coming in on this day. I'm planning to pay the rent. Just know that I can't make it on the 1st. It's going to be the 4th, and being okay with that because they're people and because housing is so important. Landlords are providing a really, really important thing for people. It's a basic need, like Maslow's hierarchy, like you were saying at the beginning. So landlords need to realize, one, tenants are people, and two, what they're providing to those tenants is so vital to human thriving. They need to be willing to work through difficulties with them if possible.
Absolutely. I went on a little trip to Pittsburgh to take care of my sister's rabbit over the weekend, and packing my suitcase, I couldn't imagine packing my room up in a second, getting an eviction notice from my parents, having to pack everything up. So absolutely, I understand that. And I think one thing you talked about that was so powerful is the humanity of it, right? We oftentimes, like I talked about, make these distinctions upon ourselves that I'm a landlord and you're the tenant. I'm with other landlords, I'm with other tenants. And one thing I want to stress to the viewers listening is, like you talk about, this is a basic need. And when everybody gets housing, we all win, right? When we are in an environment where people are working with each other, not discriminatory and hiring on things that we can change, not things that we can't change, I think that would definitely be a step in the right direction. And as a young person, we look at the housing market, the economy, and the state that the country is going to. It's very nice to hear people focused on making housing something that everybody can have access to. At some point, I'm going to want to move out. At some point, I'm going to want to spread my wings and go to my own place. But like you said, going to a place or going to a job or a housing application and feeling like it's a job interview are things I think people are worried about. But if we can do things and hire and rent on merit, I think will be a lot more exciting. And going back to that humanity piece of connecting tenants and people, one of the best ways to connect tenants and people in general are events. And I heard you guys got some pretty exciting events coming up with H.O.M.E, and actually two I'm really excited about. There's two of, actually they are, but the two that if I could open my phone and check them out, the two that I'm most excited about are the community barbecue and the H.O.M.E 60th annual dinner gala. Can you guys talk a little bit about that and how we should get involved and why we should be involved?
Yeah, I mean, starting with the community barbecue, that one is just a great day where we invite the community down to our location, 1542 Main Street at the corner of Main and West Ferry. In our parking lot there, we have a lot of fun events for, the community. We have free food. We have popcorn machines, snow cone machines, all that good stuff. And we also have some opportunity to meet with our staff, to talk with our staff, learn your rights and responsibilities under the law as well. But really just a tremendous day for us to get together with the community and let them know, this is the work that we're doing, and we can all just get together and have a good time. So it's something that we really look forward to.
And we also really value being able to hold events at our office because it's on Main Street, and we live in a very segregated city, and Main Street is the dividing line. And so to have a location that can feel comfortable for people from either side of that Main Street divide to come together and see each other as neighbors is really important. And so, our location, it's intentional where our office is right there on Main Street. And we want to try to bring those two sides of the city together. So we remember that we are one city, we are one Buffalo, and we want to make sure that people don't forget about the people on the other side of Main Street from them.
Absolutely. I've been to the H.O.M.E facility and you can't miss it. It's in a great location with parking for the event and other things. And moving Well, let's talk about the date, actually. We didn't give an exact date. So I want you, if you're listening, take out your calendars. And if you're free on August 19th from 12 to 3, you know where you have to be at 1542 Main Street, Buffalo. Let's switch sides. Let's go from the barbecue outside cooking to a little more formal. I put on my suit. I got my slacks pressed, and now we're at the Home 60th annual dinner on Friday, October 27th, 5:30 to 9:30. What is that going to look like at Rich's Atrium at 1 Robert Rich Way, Buffalo, New York?
Yeah, I mean, we are so excited for our 60th gala. You know, it's Home's 60th birthday. We've been in the community now for a few years, and really it's just an opportunity for us to come together to celebrate our successes over the years, also to recognize the work that still needs to be done. We give out awards to members of the community and organizations that we really feel have done a great job throughout the year. And really, again, it's just a chance to celebrate some successes, but also keep our eye on the fact that so much work still needs to be done, and just come together in fellowship. So it's a wonderful time as well.
And absolutely, and I think we actually have a caller who might be interested in finding out more. Caller, you are on the air. Hello, caller, you are on the air. We can hear you.
Good day. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm thankful. I had to call back because it sounded like I got disconnected. I was wondering if your guest could help with an issue that's arisen in the last 2 or 3 years. And I call it rent inflation. I'm not sure if that's the proper title, but the rents that have gone up over 100 to 200% in the last 3 years, whereas people's incomes have not gone up even 10 or 20% in the last 2 or 3 years. And I was wondering if a lot of people are facing rents that were unheard of, a few years ago in Buffalo as normal. Is there anything that can be done to turn that back or to address what I call rent inflation that has happened in the city based on primarily people coming from outside of the city, from New York and other places where they're used to these types of rents, and then imposing them on the city of Buffalo?
Yeah, it's a great question, and honestly, it's a very serious problem in Buffalo and frankly around the country. As Stephen mentioned, as New Yorkers, we do enjoy a lot of rights. However, one of the main areas where we, I think, lack necessary protections is one to ensure that your rent stays affordable. And like you said, over the past few years, we have seen rents skyrocket. And I, receive calls almost on the daily basis from folks, many of whom are on a fixed income. Maybe they're seniors, they have very limited means, and they're seeing their rents go up $200, $300, $500 a month. And they just are unable to pay those kind of increases. And look, I understand this is a business, and these housing providers, they can raise the rents, but the fact is that there is nothing currently under the law that restricts how much a housing provider can increase that rent, with some caveats. Unless it is subsidized housing, if it is, there is some rent regulation in Buffalo as well, but most folks are just renting from private landlords. And in that case, that landlord can raise the rent as much as he or she wants, granted that there's not a lease currently in place. All right. But even if there isn't a lease in place, if you're just a month-to-month tenant, they still have to give you proper notice under the law. And that depends on how long you've been a tenant of that property. All right. So if you've been in the property for under a year, they have to give you at least a 30-day notice that, hey, I'm going to raise the rent. If you've been in the property between a year and 2 years, they have to give you 60 days. And if you've been in that property for over 2 years, they have to give you at least 90 days notice. So you at least have a little bit of notice period there. And that was some of the changes that were made under the Tenant Protection Act that was passed in 2019. But in my view, that didn't go far enough, because although it gave folks a little bit more time as far as notice periods, landlords, again, private landlords, are still able to raise that rent in many cases to just an egregious amount. And it's having serious impacts on our community. And it's a real problem. And there is some legislation that is currently stalled, in New York State, in our legislature. And I'd encourage folks to reach out to their state representatives, let them know that the good cause eviction bill, which would limit the amount that landlords can raise the rent, they could still raise the rent, but they can't do it to this extreme. They can raise it 5%, okay? But in many cases, these rental increases are just out of control. So I really encourage folks to learn more about that particular bill and encourage their legislators to pass that.
And it's really important for people to reach out to their representatives because the landlords have an organized force of putting pressure on elected representatives and telling them what they want. And to counteract that, tenants need to make their voices heard as well.
I think they're making their voices heard right now. We might have another call coming in. Paula, you were on the
I
air.
had a follow-up question. The follow-up question was, he used the term affordable.
I think we got 2 callers on the line. Caller that's left. You are the only one on the line.
Hello?
Caller, yep, you're on the air. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is my issue. This is housing made equal, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I am someone who would love to be a landlord again. And I understand that there is a program with your.
Okay, they're gone.
I think we might have lost that caller. Caller, can you call back at 716-837-1112? We have another caller on the line. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Now, the question I had is, he used the term affordable, and the city is building a property, and a lot of people are supposed to have affordable apartments included. I've never heard a clear-cut definition that everybody can agree upon on what affordable means when they say affordable housing.
Yeah, that's another great question. It's one of those terms that really does not have a clear definition, and you're absolutely right. You have to be careful about that because a lot of times folks will claim that they're building affordable housing. And if you look at what definition they're using for affordable, it may not actually be affordable at all. Okay, so really you have to see exactly what that developer is talking about when they're proposing affordable housing, or that that government representative is talking about when they're talking about, oh, we have affordable housing that's being developed in Buffalo right now. What does that actually mean? Sometimes you can break it down in terms of percentages. The rent is capped at a certain percentage of the area median income. But it really, in those cases, the devil's in the details, because to your point, you're absolutely right. I can call something affordable all day long, but in reality, is it actually affordable? So that's a great point. It's something that we have to be on the lookout for as well.
Yeah, asking affordable for whom, and then also making sure that you're not basing the affordability on the market rent, because as we've just established, the market rent is crazy high. You have to be comparing it to people's incomes and not to the rent of market rate units as well.
Absolutely. And like you said, affordable is subjective. There's certain things. A jet is only affordable for certain people. And one thing I want to talk about to the landlords that may be listening is you have to recognize, like I talked about, this is about an everybody issue. If we can't afford housing, we can't pay you. We can't rent your place out if we can't afford it. So think about that. You have to you're in the market as well. You're in the business of sales as well if you're a landlord, and you can't put out a product that nobody can afford.
It's such a great point, and it's something that I often talk about with housing providers and just people in general, that really when we're talking about fair housing, this is about economic development, because really when folks are able to, again, live in the housing communities of their choice, when they have access to those opportunities for good jobs, to go to good schools, to have all of those fundamental opportunities to reach their maximum potential, that benefits everyone, as opposed to when folks are denied those opportunities and then they have to take substandard housing in areas that don't have access to those opportunities. That has a direct and opposite drain on folks' potential, and it harms everyone in our community.
Absolutely. And we'll finish talking with this right after we come back from break.
Okay.
We're still online. When it comes to something as personal as your clothes, you need to deal with somebody you can trust. That's why so many people turn to Haagsman Dry Cleaning. Conveniently located in the heart of the community at 874 East Sullivan at the corner of Wyoming.
When you take your clothes to Haagsman's, you can trust.
Get that on for a minute, maybe or no? We're still on Facebook Live. So, who you on? It's only like a 30-second. You can even trust that you won't have to get out of your car if you don't want to. Haagsman's has a drive-through window for your convenience.
Trust is what it's all about at Haagsman's Dry Cleaning.
Haagsman's Dry Cleaning, your one-stop dry cleaner serving the community for over 30 years at 874 East Sullivan at the corner of Wyoming. Call 891-8298. That's 891-8298.
Yeah, you guys are killing it. I'm like.
On your period. Some gushes happen without warning. But now you can say goodbye to stand-up gush fears. Thanks to Always Ultra Vents with rapid dry technology. It absorbs gushes 2 times faster than the leading store brand and gives you up to 100% leak-free protection. Hello, clean and comfortable with Always Fear No Gush.
Carson, get back!
Hey, I'm Jasmine Carson.
Is there anything you want to tell people while they're on live about the gala? That it's the 60th gala coming up. That they, if they want to be sponsors, that's a way
to.
to.
The only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic
we
area.
can
Featuring a razor with
refer
a
them to
pain
the,
tip
definitely refer
irritation
them to
defense
the
bar and a skincare regimen that is
website
dermatologist
page, because
tested.
you can buy
Venus
tickets
helps
or
protect your pubic
get
skin from
information
shade
about
irritation. Visit
becoming a sponsor on that
GilletteVenus.com to learn
website.
more about the
And
full
it's got
regimen of
Wendy's
products.
contact information there too.
If you're
So
passionate
I think
about making a
definitely
difference and helping
home
others,
and my
nursing may be the
dinner,
perfect career
send
for
people
you.
there.
At the University at Buffalo, we're dedicated to providing you the best education and training to prepare you for a successful career. With a nursing degree, you'll have the skills and knowledge to make a real impact on the world. Visit nursing.buffalo.edu to get started.
Hello, Buffalo. It's still Conversation with Jim Anderson, and we have a caller. Before we get to the call, I want to just remind you, if you're just tuning in what we're talking about, I have a Mr. Daniel Corbitt and a Mr. Stephen H.O.M.E talking about equitable housing. We talked about source of income and disability discrimination and a little bit on the community barbecue, but we were talking about the 60th anniversary gala. Before we touch on that, I think we have a caller. Caller, you are on the air.
Thank you. I want to ask a question as to why, when you're trying to provide affordable housing in the city of Buffalo, H.O.M.E offers a program for North Buffalo and South Buffalo, not available for East Side landlords to fix these houses. My house just needs a little love, and I cannot rent it. But I understand there is a program that's available for people who own property in North Buffalo and South Buffalo. They assist the landlord with fixing the houses. They teach the tenants. They assist them with paying the rent. Why can't I get that as an East Side landlord? Can you please explain that?
Yeah,
That's cutting out affordable housing options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the program that you're referring to, we do have a mobility assistance program currently. The latest iteration, we've been having a program since 1999 that really helps folks find safe, quality, affordable housing, and also provides them with a kind of wrap around comprehensive assistance, because to overcome a lot of those barriers that we've been talking about, you need not only that education piece in the beginning, but also that continued assistance to ensure that once you make that move, you're able to stay there long term and enjoy the benefits of those opportunities that we did mention previously. Unfortunately, that program is very heavily regulated by the state, and they dictate the terms of that program. So really, there are certain opportunities that are opportunity areas that are designated, looking at an index referred to, I'm going to get in the weeds here, but it's a Child Opportunity Index. And really, the whole idea of that program, oh, go ahead.
You need more affordable housing. Who's advocating to change that? Just because my house is located in a certain zip code does not mean it's not suitable or a wonderful place to live. And I think that's very discriminatory, and it's limiting your housing availability with all these people needing somewhere to go. So I would hope that someone would look at looking for a different source, and started here also for everyone in the city of Buffalo. That's what my comment is as someone trying to provide affordable housing. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. We're never going to say that someone cannot live wherever they want to live. But when we do have certain incentives for landlords in those designated opportunity areas, which again have been designated looking at things like the Child Opportunity Index, because really the purpose of that program is for families with young children to help them move to neighborhoods that have access to those high performing schools, to those good paying jobs. So for those additional incentives, unfortunately, they're only available in certain neighborhoods. But certainly to your point, absolutely in East Buffalo and throughout Western New York, there are tremendous neighborhoods, and we never are going to tell anybody that they can't live where they don't want to. But unfortunately, with some of those incentives, we're not able to provide those in every neighborhood. But we certainly would encourage you to reach out to us, and we can see what other programs may be available to assist you with maybe making some of those minor repairs to your home to be able to rent it out to interested tenants there.
Who do I need to speak to, sir? Because this is a serious issue. There's a lot of decent housing in every neighborhood on the east side of Buffalo. Is not a terrible neighborhood.
Absolutely
Okay.
not. No, there's
Like
wonderful neighborhoods in East
everyone
Buffalo.
needs. So, okay, thank you for answering my question. I won't call, keep you, but I will be calling. Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Jim Anderson actually sent me a text, and he said, if I can ask, isn't that a type of redlining? That's what his question. I got it about the boss's question.
Is that program?
Is that program? And what I'm understanding, I also want to kind of translate a little bit for what I'm hearing is it's not a program necessarily just for landlord support, but it's a program focused on the dispersal of children to get help in their future. It's more of an investment program to make sure that if I don't have the means to get my kid around and exposed to greater, maybe I can move into an environment that has. But I think what they were asking, and I'll even get back to this question, are there other programs or other organizations that focus more on the landlord support side for people who want to get into this field but just don't have the technical skills or the knowledge?
There absolutely are, and this program is so specific, like you said, really focusing on families, helping them move to neighborhoods that, again, through research have been found to, when folks grow up in these neighborhoods, when they have access to these opportunities, that has a generational impact. When you can go to a high performing school, when you have quick resource to amenities like parks and places where your kids can play, and you have easy access to transportation lines that I can take to a high paying job, those have serious benefits to the folks who are able to live in those communities. But the fact is, there are so many barriers that are keeping folks out of those neighborhoods, specifically for voucher holders, for folks who have Section 8. And as I mentioned, source of income is the most common type of discrimination that we see. So the program is specific to folks who have a voucher, who have young children in their household, and they want to move to one of these neighborhoods, but they are facing so many barriers that they're unable to do so. And like Stephen mentioned, our community is so segregated. We have areas of concentrated poverty that are segregated not just by income, but by race. And that is a serious problem in Western New York. So if we are ever going to break down those barriers, if we're going to reduce the levels of sky high segregation in Buffalo, we need to help folks by giving them those extra resources to be able to overcome those barriers. So that's why we have some of those incentives, because the reality is that folks are often not able to access those opportunities without those added resources. So I would not say that it's redlining at all. I'd say that it's a recognition that to overcome those barriers, you need added resources.
Right. And yeah, to talk a little bit more about the question of redlining, redlining is a practice of creating barriers and limiting opportunity. And historically, it has prevented Black Americans from accessing home ownership where it was available to white Americans with similar incomes. And redlining is one of the main reasons we have such a segregated city, and that we are not alone in this country of being a segregated city. And our mobility program, like Dan said, it's a recognition of the barriers that redlining created, and it's trying to remove some of those barriers for some people. We don't have the funding to do it for everyone. We wish we could, but that money doesn't exist. So we're using the resources that we do have to help families who want to move to certain neighborhoods where their children, based on research, will have more opportunity to be upwardly economically mobile as they grow up. And we're not telling people where they have to live. We're taking people who want to live in these neighborhoods and saying, we want to take down the barriers that have prevented you from doing this on your own, and we want to work with you to help you get where you want to go.
Right, and to fund both perspectives, I think like what you guys are talking about, to summarize what you guys are saying, is I don't want you guys to think of this program as something for landlords. This is a child investment program to make sure and help children's futures. And on the other side, I also want to understand to what Jim and what the caller were saying, it also does sometimes, the danger feels, as someone who's in that minority class, I don't want to move out. I want to live in an environment where I can stay here and thrive. I want to thrive where I am. And so for those landlord support resources, I would recommend to the caller to call home and call organizations. I wish I had more information, but I bet if you could call, that context may be a little more useful and when it goes to giving advice and leading you to where you need to be. But that's a good point to bring up. And those landlord training classes, landlord information, to give the power back to us so we don't have to move, but we can have the money in our communities by people that look like us. I think it's something that needs to be brought up, something that needs to be more in the focus. I think there's probably other organizations that focus better on that I would love to get that information to you. And I don't want to.
And here I go playing the role of Jim. I'm about to play the role of Jim.
We have
the ghost talker. So I think what Jim is trying to say is that in the city of Buffalo is different than other neighborhoods. So for example, if I grew up in Cleveland, I live in Cheektowaga. Our school district is Cleve Hill. I don't have any other options for public school other than Cleve Hill. Buffalo's different though, because you can live anywhere and put your kid in either a private school, a charter school, one of those schools with lotteries. So it really doesn't matter where I live to be exposed to the educational opportunities in the city of Buffalo. It's still a small city with a lot of public transportation. So I think when Jim hears a response like that, if I was playing in the spirit of Jim right now, it would be, that's a poor excuse though, to say that there's a program with availability based on research, because in Buffalo, you can go to school anywhere. You can go to school anywhere you want to. Now there are neighborhood schools. So maybe that's the justification. We're pulling from the neighborhood schools in some of those areas like West Buffalo or some of those other places. But in general, if I was to go back on just the statement, in the city of Buffalo, my kid can go to school anywhere, but we don't have those other resources you're talking about. So as a tenant, how do they, or a community, let's put it back on a community, which is this radio show. As a community, what can they do to really advocate? And does your agency help them to understand how do you get some of those resources into that neighborhood so that then funding opportunities from home are more attractive to that? Because now we have those things that you were talking about, Steve. If it's access to things and resources that a home program will want to sponsor and invest in those communities. So I was channeling Jim.
Jim, you look a little different today.
I think that's what Jim would have said.
Well, I do want to reiterate something that Dan said, which is that we aren't the ones who decide where we are allowed to spend this money.
Right.
We have funding sources. Part of it is from the state, and we have been told this is the map. These are the green neighborhoods where you can spend these funds. And we can give a little bit of pushback, and we have given a little bit of pushback and tried to add a few that they weren't originally wanting us to be able to house people in through this program. But we understand that not everyone wants to live in these neighborhoods. And like I said, we're not forcing anyone to move where they don't want to move. And I wish that we had funding to help people regardless of where they wanted to move to. It's just the way that this particular program is structured. This is how we were able to get funding to do this for some people, and doing it for some people is better than not doing it for anyone at all. I wish we could do it for everyone wherever they wanted to live, for all of the communities. That's a lot of money that we don't have, and we are doing the best with the resources that we do have under the constraints that it's presented to us with.
Yeah, and to your point, you're absolutely right with, how the school system is set up in Buffalo. But again, with the Child Opportunity Index, it's looking at a whole host of factors beyond just schools. And certainly that's one component of it. It's an important component. But there are many other factors that this index is looking at to, again, maximize a family's opportunities, to give them really the best accumulation of factors to ensure that they're going to be as successful as possible. I wish I could talk more about the Child Opportunity Index and how it was actually developed, but some folks who are much smarter than I came up with it, researchers who actually looked at the numbers, crunched all the numbers, came up with this very complicated system, and then put it in place. And again, we did not come up with that. We are not the ones that are dictating the terms of that index. That is what research has borne out. But I totally take your point. Yeah,
and flip to the other side, ownership.
And I'm bringing in the young perspective. So what it sounds like to me is that you guys' hands are almost tied a little bit. So what we need to focus is the energy that we have for this organization. We need to take a little bit of that zeal and put it into our politics and say, what bills are being passed? What lines are they drawing so that then home can work within the new lines that we're fighting to be created. And I wish I could dwell more on, like you said, the Child Opportunity Index and things of those nature, but I want to continue moving for the sake of time. We got cut off on the break on the 60th annual Gala for Home. Can you guys talk about a little bit what that's going to look like, what that night looks like, and why we should be there at Ridgeway?
Yeah, it's going to be a celebration of the successes that we have had, but also a recognition of the work that remains to be done. We were founded in 1960. In New York for 6 decades now, and we wish we could put ourselves out of a job. But the structures and the forces that make housing difficult for so many people, they're very strong and they're very entrenched, and we will continue to fight for as long as our services are needed. And the dinner is a recognition of both of those things, of the progress that has been made over the past 60 years, from housing discrimination being legal to having now 14 protected classes, which are characteristics people can't be denied housing based on. And that's huge progress. There has been progress and we want to celebrate it, but we also want to keep pushing for continued strengthening of protections for people.
Absolutely. And just so that people can know, it is on Friday again, Friday, October 27th from 5:30 to 9:30. And I also want to say it's at the H.O.M.E at Rich's 1 Robert Rich Way in Buffalo, New York, 14213. It'll definitely be a great event. I'm looking forward to hopefully attending the community gala. And moving on to the last topic, I know we're moving, like we said, we have time, about 12 minutes left. I want to talk about application fee limits. Let's say I'm not in the house, I'm applying, I'm someone who's listening and trying to get out, right? I'm trying to move out. Like I said, let's move me maybe 6 months, a year down the line. I got my money together, I'm applying. What things should I look out for even in the application process? What fee limit regulation, what are other places where landlords are violating the law that we may not even be aware of?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in 2019, there was some important legislation that was passed. It's called the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. And it did a lot of things, but one of the things that it was focused on was removing some of the barriers, upfront costs that really were preventing folks from accessing housing. And anyone who tried to rent an apartment a few years ago, a lot of times what they were doing, they were being faced with having to pay for the first month's rent, the last month's rent, security deposit, as well as application fees. folks were a lot of times paying thousands of dollars before they had even moved into a place. So really what the law did, among other things, is try to limit those fees. So now all a landlord can request for you to pay up front is a first month's rent and security deposit. And that application fee, which, as Stephen mentioned, a landlord can charge you for a credit and background check. That's legal. However, they can't charge you any more than $20 or the cost of running those credit and background checks, whatever is less.
And so, you know, if a landlord is charging any more than $20, regardless of what they're doing with it, that is against state law. And if a landlord doesn't run a background check or a credit check, they can't charge a fee just to apply. It's basically just reimbursing the landlord for the cost of running those checks. Additionally, landlords who do take a fee in order to run a background check or a credit check, they have to provide a copy of those reports to the applicant. And then if someone gets that report, as long as it's less than a month old, they can then take that to the next place they apply and provide it to the housing provider. And then the housing provider has to accept that and cannot still charge an application fee. So if someone is in the housing search process, if they exercise their rights fully under state law, they should only have to pay $20 one time over a month period and be able to use those reports in other places where they apply. There are a few small exceptions, like online platforms like Zillow, where they charge like $30 or $35 or something like that, where someone pays the fee once and then they can apply multiple times to however many places on that platform. But that's really the only exception. If it's just a regular housing provider doing their own thing, running their own reports through whatever third-party service they use, then $20 is the maximum.
So first month, security deposit, and no more than $20. And if you're smart, you apply all in a month, that $20 should carry over. And this is the information that people really need to hear. This is the information that people, when we're talking about even the next generations, I'm speaking of the voice of the youth, even the next generations, we don't know this. We don't have housing class in school. At least I didn't go to that. I must have skipped that every time. we had other class. We didn't have housing class and policy class and things of that nature. So I would be amiss to end this interview without giving people like me who are curious a chance to get in touch. If I'm someone who wants to walk along this process, I know we talked about 1542 Main Street is the address, but what other ways and what people should reach out? How can they get in touch, and what should they be doing?
Yeah, I mean, we want to help both tenants and landlords understand fair housing law. For landlords, we have an online webinar that's free. People can take it. They can learn about what they can and can't do when they're screening tenants, and learn about all of these like fee limits and things like that to make sure that they are doing things the right way. And for tenants, anytime someone has a question like, my landlord did this, was that legal? They can contact us. We have a form on our website. Our website is homeny.org. And there is a form, there's a button in the corner to either report discrimination or request some other kind of assistance, just to ask a question about a situation, ask a question, or bring a complaint about a landlord charging more than $20 for an application fee, or trying to get first month's, last month's, and security deposit all up front. They can do that through our website. They can call us at 716-854-1400. Or they can email us at info@homeny.org, whatever is most convenient to someone, coming to the office, calling, emailing, filling out that form. There are a lot of ways people can contact us. And I do want to make sure people realize, we talked a bit about our mobility program and where we can operate that. That is the only program of ours that has any restrictions. All of these other things, asking questions, having us help you advocate for your rights, that's for everyone. There are no restrictions. There's no income limits. If you want to know about your rights, you can come to us and ask, and we will help you.
Absolutely. I'm going to do a quick recap as we get around to the last 5 minutes of the interview. And then after I do the recap, the time will be yours. Like I said, we had a great interview today talking about a lot of important things. And we recognize how important housing is. It's really hard to be a functional member of society where you don't have a place to lay your head at night. And oftentimes, when We're trying to get into these rooms and it's so desperate that emotional needs can cause us to overlook discrimination, overlook policy breaks, simply for the sake of a pillow to lay our head at night. So I understand, but it's glad to be around people like a Mr. Daniel Corbitt and a Mr. Stephen H. who are working to break down these barriers and truly working with an organization like H.O.M.E to make sure that everybody has a chance. Housing opportunities finally will one day, hopefully, be made equal. We talked about source of income discrimination. We also talked about disability discrimination and how that can appear in different places, right? You can't get mad at me for using the benefits that the government is offering. And you especially can't get mad at me about asking to make a house accessible if I want to live there and I have things that are restricting me from doing so. We talked about some upcoming events from H.O.M.E that you should really need to be on the lookout for. We talked about the community barbecue on Saturday, August 19th from 12 to 3 at H.O.M.E, which is at 1542 Main Street. We also talked about H.O.M.E's 60th annual dinner gala, which will be Friday, October 27th, 5:30 to 9:30 at Rich's Way, H.O.M.E on 1 Robert Rich Way, Buffalo. So make sure you're ready to eat because it might have some good food. You know, the gala's be having a little bit of food there and some entertainment. So make sure to come out to those. And lastly, we talked about application fee limits and regulations and a couple other places where landlords sometimes violate the law. And one thing I want to say to the callers of the landlords listening is make sure you listen fully, right? They have resources, they have things available, courses available, and be sure to reach out to H.O.M.E. Is there anything guys would like to leave as we're wrapping up the interview?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people know how to get involved in those events that we have coming up if they want to. So our community barbecue in August, that's in our parking lot at our office at 1542 Main Street. So just bring yourself. We'll have food there. For the dinner, the gala in October, people can go on our website at homeny.org/dinner. And you can buy tickets or find sponsorship information there. You can also find the contact information for our fund development manager who is running the show and planning this event if you have any more questions about the dinner.
I just want to, thank you again for giving us an opportunity to come on, talk about these very important issues. And again, really encourage folks to reach out to us if they have any questions, concerns, if they're a landlord, housing provider, tenant, whoever you are. If you got questions, concerns, contact us. Our services are free, confidential. And as I mentioned, we are trying to empower the community so they can be their own advocates and they can advocate for themselves to ensure that this is a more just and equitable community for all. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Before I leave, I just want to say a special shout out to the fund manager you mentioned, Mrs. Wendy Mennick, and the connection, the work that she's done. She actually got me into the station. So a special shout out to her. And I'll be amiss to not say shout out to Jim Anderson. Enjoy the wedding that you're at this weekend and take care and be safe. It's been a pleasure interviewing you guys, and hopefully we'll get you guys back here. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Okay.